Welcome to our Old North State Tailgate. Chris Edwards, great to be with David Glennon today. We're outside the General Assembly in the capital city of Raleigh to talk about another week of college football in the Old North State. And DG, we got to start with a big picture conversation before we dive deeper into what's going on locally. Last week when we were talking, there was no top 25 versus top 25 matchup in the FBS. This week, man, if last week was an appetizer, you get the main course this week, don't you?
Chris, they haven't asked us to pass any legislation today, which is probably a good thing for everybody. But we have a tasty menu of treats in college football. And obviously, you and I always get to the North Carolina-centric angles. But whereas last week was one of those where maybe if you watched your favorite team only, you didn't miss a whole lot.
Yep.
Here's the bottom line entering this week. 5 of the last 8 national champions in college football have been won by Alabama, 3, or Clemson, 2. Both of those teams already have one loss this season. The Tide lost to Texas. The Tigers, we were there on Labor Day night when they went to Duke and lost to the Blue Devils. In the 9-year format of the college football playoff, there has never been an invitation to a 2-loss team. So when Clemson hosts a really good Florida State team this weekend, and as Alabama hosts a really good Ole Miss team this weekend, with both already having one loss, it is not an exaggeration to say that their national championship hopes are on the line. And oh, by the way, undefeated Ohio State is visiting undefeated Notre Dame. And oh, by the way, Deion Sanders in Colorado are playing undefeated Oregon out in Pac-12 country. Iowa against Penn State, another battle of unbeatens. It is a potpourri for college football fans this week. And that starting point, coaches sometimes roll their eyes that we make too much of a mid-September. We're not making too much of anything.
Nope.
We have one more year of the 4-team college football playoff, and there are absolutely dominoes that will fall today that impact the race for the national title.
Well, we're excited about all those games. We'll get deeper into those, but let's go back and talk about last week as we break the huddle, presented by the Original Salt Works. The Original Salt Works has been serving the Wilmington area for over 50 years. Owner Bob Hubbard and his staff create a welcome atmosphere to go along with their home-cooked breakfast and lunch that simply cannot be rivaled anywhere else in North Carolina. Pancakes, eggs, waffles, hot dogs, crab cakes, and man, the best grits in the state. The Original Salt Works are a proud partner of the North Carolina Sports Network. All right, just some quick hits as we get out of the huddle, looking back at last week, week 3 of the college football season. Appalachian stayed at home. We were there for our Old North State tailgate and our traveling sports circus. We saw the Mountaineers with the big win over the Pirates.
I thought Mike Waddell and I shook hands with about 1,000 fans. We were right next to the rock. We were throwing footballs, giving away prizes within a putt of the actual field there at Kid Brewer Stadium. Shout out to the Mountaineers. They tied their all-time record with 40,000 plus. And on the field, Sean Clark takes a big step forward. Former offensive lineman, great running game. Nate Noel is a superstar, and they really mashed the Pirates on the ground. On the other side, Mike Houston is now officially an embattled 5th-year coach at ECU. It's not everybody in that fan base, but the Pirates don't like starting 0-3, especially when their offense has truly been putrid during that 0-3 start.
We'll talk more about the Pirates coming up in just a second here on our first segment. All right, how about the Tar Heels of North Carolina continuing to do really what they've done all season long as they beat Minnesota at Kenan Stadium? It was a very balanced attack for Mac Brown's offense.
Yeah, and you know the deal. We've talked about this for 3 weeks now. A middling team lets the Gamecocks hang around in week 1. A middling team takes a previously undefeated Minnesota team that does run the ball well and does play good defense, and they let them hang around. The Tar Heels have not been that middling team. They're 3-0 in style. They dominated the Gamecocks with their pass rush. They survived App State, but then they dominated Minnesota. Drake May was a great quarterback, even with some mistakes, and Minnesota's quarterbacks were overwhelmed by the Carolina defense. That was the difference in the game, and it shows that the Tar Heels have now won in 3 different ways, right? First with your defense, then with your running game, then because you have a much better quarterback than either guy the Gophers tried against the Tar Heels. It's only a 3-0 start. It's only late September, but the Tar Heels are off to as good a start as you could ask.
We talk about winning in different ways. 2 teams in our state are 3-0, but they won last week in very different ways. Duke really no problems with Northwestern at Wallace Wade Stadium, but Wake Forest still undefeated. But man, the Demon Deacons had to grind out a win on the road at Old Dominion.
It's crazy. Duke, Wake, and Carolina are 3-0 for only the second time in the 70-year history of the ACC.
Wow.
The other time was last year.
That's crazy.
So we have fun angles to talk about, and it's going to pour into October and hopefully even November and December. Duke taking care of the embattled Northwestern team was not a surprise. Riley Leonard's a great quarterback. The Devils can run it. They can throw it. They're well coached on defense under Mike Elko. I was particularly impressed by the Wake win at ODU. If you're down double digits at halftime and you're still down early in the fourth quarter and you have a first-year starter at quarterback on the road, those dynamics usually lead to a loss. The Demon Deacons stuck to the plan. The Demon Deacons believe in Dave Clawson as their head coach and the rest of the game plan. They didn't hit the panic button, even on the road, even with those late deficits. And Mitch Griffiths, Sam Hartman's successor at quarterback, even as a first-year starter, made those second-half touchdown throws to a really good core of wide receivers that the Demon Deacons needed to get that win against ODU.
And then NC State, no problems at home at Carter Finley with VMI. Really went as expected for the Wolfpack last week.
Yeah, I don't think we learn a lot about the Wolfpack when you beat up on 45-7 against VMI. But we've been asking for the Wolfpack to show some skill players. We talked about Casey Concepcion earlier this year, and he still looks promising, no doubt. A freshman running back named Kendrick Raphael had a great game against VMI. A sophomore wideout who's also a return man, Julian Gray, kind of made a name for himself against VMI. And I get it, it's only VMI, but if you're Brendan Armstrong, the quarterback, and you're trying to build chemistry, you need all the help you can get from an offensive line and skill players who didn't help you enough in that loss to Notre Dame. The more of those guys who emerge for Armstrong, the more promising the outlook for the Wolfpack this season.
All right, time for our audible segment now. We talked about it earlier. East Carolina, boy, the Pirates in a little bit of trouble. They're 0-3, heading home today to take on a Gardner-Webb team out of the Big South Conference. A lot of question marks for East Carolina. You mentioned the quarterback situation earlier. They played 2 quarterbacks last week at Appalachian State. Players in the transfer portal already for the Pirates. And I've got questions about their defense, DG. Gave up 30 points at Michigan, 31 at home to Marshall, and then the 43 last week to Appalachian State. Where do the Pirates go to right the ship and start to turn the tide?
There are fair points on all sides here because, as we discussed in previous weeks, Holton Ahlers has been on an NFL practice squad as the Pirates quarterback in recent years. Their best wide receivers, their best tight end, also best running back from last year, all on NFL practice squads. So it's fair to expect an adjustment period. But where the angriest Pirate fans have a fair point is this is not year 1 or year 2 under Mike Houston, right? When he had losing seasons his first 2 years, the rational members of that fan base gave him the benefit of the doubt. And they said he inherited a difficult cupboard, if you will, from Scotty Montgomery. So they waited and they had some patience, and sure enough, it pays off with bowl invitations in year 3 and year 4. Of course, when you're in year 5, the expectation bar is raised. That doesn't mean you have to miraculously be better than you were last year with all that NFL caliber talent, but you should be a bowl team when you're in year 5. You should have the next guy at quarterback when you're in year 5. Neither Mason Garcia nor Alex Flynn has looked like the next guy. So you're worried about the defense, I'm worried about the offense. That's a lot to worry about in Greenville right now. I expect the Pirates to win this week, but Mike Houston has his hands full. The good news for him is the new version of the American Athletic Conference is not quite as intimidating as the versions of recent years before some really prominent programs departed for the Big 12.
Let's stick to the American Conference. A new member to that conference is the Charlotte 49ers. They're 1-2 right now. Look, a tough week for Charlotte last week. Coach Biff in his first year as the head coach at Charlotte. And you know,
Thing there.
all right, here we go. Woo! How about that? Woo!
There we go.
All right. We'll stick in the American Conference now. One of the new members to that conference, the Charlotte 49ers, up and down start to the season for Coach Biff in his first year. And if you go back and listen to his press conference from last week, DG, he talked a lot about the offense and changes, not just in the quarterback room, but he hinted at changes at his offensive staff 3 weeks into the season.
Well, he's a funny guy. He's a famous, legendary high school coach in Maryland. Anybody from that part of our country would be aware of Biff Poggi. Also worked at Michigan on Harbaugh's staff in recent years. This is his first time opportunity as a head coach in major college football, and he's been a quirky guy. Like, he has called out Charlotte 49ers' own fan base, saying, hey, if y'all want a better product on the field, you better reach into your pocket for NIL and season tickets and all these other things. He appears to be unafraid. As a transplanted Northeasterner myself, I have an appreciation for that bold in-your-face personality. I'm not sure how it's being received in Charlotte right now because they're not winning. But I thought it was cool that they played Maryland on national TV. That was a 7:30 NBC spotlight game.
Yeah.
And they hung with the Terps for a while. I'm excited for the players because now they get to experience. They go from national TV on NBC and a Saturday night primetime game on a prominent channel to the Swamp.
Yeah.
And do I expect them to beat the Gators? No. But those are two pretty cool experiences, and I would imagine that's part of Biff Poggi's sales pitch. Come to Charlotte, new league, prominent non-conference games, and really a more manageable version of the American, as we said with ECU.
All right, we'll have more of our Old North State tailgate coming up in just a moment. It's presented, as always, by the North Carolina Pork Council. The North Carolina pork industry plays an important role in supporting rural communities across our state. The pork industry contributes more than $10 billion a year to our state's economy and supports more than 44,000 jobs, primarily in small rural communities in eastern North Carolina. Learn more at ncpork.com. The North Carolina Pork Council, the foundational partner of the North Carolina Sports Network. Stay with us. We'll have more from the General Assembly coming up right after this on the North Carolina Sports Network.
What does it mean when people say America is a land of opportunity?
It means the power to discover,
To redefine yourself.
To improve yourself
to challenge yourself.
To realize there's more in you
than you ever knew.
that you could do.
It means giving people an open field to explore what they do best.
With the best tools,
The best training,
the best technology in the world.
We bring out the best in the people who serve.
So you can be
all you can be.
We're back here at the state capitol, the legislative building. Chris Edwards, David Glenn. It's the Old North State Tailgate presented by the NC Pork Council. And it's time for our Hot Reads of the Week, presented by Lawson Insurance and High Street Insurance Partners. Lawson Insurance is a family-operated agency known for its commitment to community and dedication to ensuring that people and businesses in Raleigh are prepared for life's challenges. They'll work with you to be certain that you have the right coverage to meet your needs so you can continue to thrive and achieve your goals when it matters most. High Street Insurance Partners is a growing national insurance agency across the continental U.S. We're the personal and business insurance experts within your community. Lawson Insurance Group's local expertise combined with High Street's extensive resources means more choice and support for you, our client. Together, we're working to create a longer, stronger, more resilient community. And we're back at the legislative building here, DGR. Let's talk about 3 games of note nationally this week. And I want to start with Coach Prime, the Colorado Buffaloes. What a win they had over Colorado State. I stayed up until 2 a.m., 3 a.m., whatever it was, to watch the Buffs beat the Rams last week. But now Coach Prime and his show, they go on the road to take on Oregon this week.
Well, Chris, let's start with what you just said. You decided to watch a game that was out west and didn't kick off until 10 o'clock.
And I didn't care who won.
Which is almost always a recipe for slightly lower viewership,
Sure.
right? One of the many, Coach Prime loves biblical references, so I'll call it one of the borderline miraculous aspects of the Colorado football story, is that through 3 weeks, the Buffaloes, who have rarely been relevant in the last 20 or so years in major college football, all 3 Buffaloes games rank in the top 5 most watched games in all of college football to this point. For those who don't know, a local matchup here in North Carolina might get 100,000 people. An FBS higher profile matchup might get 1 million people. The very biggest games of the regular season get 10 million-ish or more. And that's the neighborhood the Buffaloes have been in 3 straight times, which is incredible. Everybody has heard that Deion Sanders took over a program that under the previous coach went 1-11 last year. here's a bigger, broader perspective. In the last 20 years, Colorado has won more than 8 games in football one time. That's 2+ decades of mostly irrelevance that Deion Sanders inherited. They're on the map. They're 3-0. The whole world is watching. His players believe, but they're going to an undefeated Oregon team, so they're on the road. I saw there, last I looked, a 3-touchdown underdog, even as a 3-0 Buffaloes team. I bet you the whole world's going to be watching again, and the Buffaloes are going to be 4 of the top 8 come this time when the ratings come out midweek.
You got a pick?
Oh, I'll take Oregon.
Okay.
I respect the heck out of what
Sure.
Colorado has done. I do think Oregon's the better football team. I don't think Colorado is great defensively. So maybe it is a shootout. We'll see. But the players in that Colorado locker room have a much different perspective than I do, just as somebody making observations from the other side of the country. And that's the magic of Neon Deion, right? He's a different guy at this stage of life, but he gets people to believe in almost a faith-like way. And the guys in that locker room and the people in that fan base are really believing right now.
All right, so from Coach Prime to maybe the prime time game nationally this week, it's a trap game for Notre Dame as they get ready to face the Blue Devils of Duke next week. Undefeated Duke. Trap game for the Irish this week.
Took me a second.
As they take on Ohio State at Notre Dame Stadium in South Bend. I mean, this is a cliche, but that's why you go to school, to play in games like this.
For sure. And when these two played each other to start last season, it was one of those 10 million-ish TV games where by the end of the regular season, it was still one of the 5 most watched games. Every college football program has a brand, right? And there are only so many that are truly national brands. Notre Dame and Ohio State are both national brands. It's not only the diehards of the Irish and the Buckeyes tuning in when these two get together. Since they're both undefeated, 3-0 Buckeyes, 4-0 Irish, and they're both ranked in the national top 10, just as we're saying Alabama and Clemson have to avoid loss 2 against difficult opponents this weekend, obviously you get a margin of error of 1 loss. So neither of these two is dead in terms of national championship repercussions if they lose, but it's one of the most difficult opponents on your schedule. And I think Ohio State is slightly better, but I also think Sam Hartman, formerly of Wake Forest, gives the Irish a chance against anybody.
All right, the last game we want to hit here in our Hot Read segment, a little bit closer to home. It's maybe one of, if not the marquee matchup in the ACC this week. Florida State at Clemson. You think about, okay, did the game lose a little bit of luster with Clemson's loss to Duke in week 1? Is Florida State really back under Coach Norvell? I mean, there's a lot of question marks about both of these teams. I think that they're still unproven as they head into this game to really open up ACC play for both sides.
A lot of folks older than I remember the days when it was NC State winning an ACC football title, UNC actually winning a bunch of ACC football titles. Fast forward to 2023, there's no doubt, and most fans would guess this instinctively even if they didn't have the numbers I'm about to give you. But Clemson, which of course is an original ACC member, has 21 ACC football titles. Now, Florida State didn't even join until 1992, but the Seminoles are next with 15 ACC football titles in a much shorter period of time. No other school is even close on this list. So it is the 2 bellwether programs in the ACC. And for those who forget, remember, FSU did win 3 straight ACC football titles in 2012, 2013, and 2014. Right around that time, Jimbo Fisher took off for Texas A&M. But Dabo Swinney has won 7 of the last 8 ACC titles for the Clemson Tigers. We all know that Cade Klubnik, the young quarterback for the Tigers, was horrible when they lost at Duke on Labor Day night. He was nervous, he was ineffective, and it bled through the entire depth chart. Clemson needs a better version of Cade Klubnik to win this game. Now, Clemson's won 7 straight head-to-head against the Seminoles. Clemson has an unbelievably positive record under Dabo Swinney at Death Valley, with this game being the Seminoles visiting the Tigers. There's a decent chance, as you know, that these two end up seeing each other again in Charlotte at the ACC title game. But I'm watching the quarterbacks, because Florida State's Jordan Travis is a much more proven commodity, as we said about Riley Leonard of Duke. And Cade Klubnik has helped the Tigers beat a couple of lesser opponents, but he's on a different stage this Saturday afternoon, and the Tigers are going to need a much better version of their young quarterback to beat FSU.
You want to make a pick in this one?
I'll take Clemson.
Okay.
Now, if you and I are at the betting window in Vegas, this is one where I say, Chris, let's find a different game to bet on.
Sure.
I just don't – I believe Clemson's total depth chart is not being given enough credit. There's a lot of fifth-year guys who could have turned pro early or didn't have to come back, and they did. And they did, in their own words, to try to win a national championship. I don't know if they're that good because we're not sure where we're getting from quarterback of the Tigers. But I do believe the rest of that depth chart is as good, if not better, as Florida State's depth chart. But, man, QB is the most important position on the field. It just is. And either Cade Klubnik is ready for this moment or he's not. He'll have plenty of support from the home crowd, but also his teammates. Again, I sheepishly pick the Tigers to defend that home turf and not get knocked out of the national championship conversation. Again, this is a school that won it all under Dabo Swinney in 2016 and 2018, and that fan base has been really disappointed that they've missed the 4-team playoff these last couple years.
What DG is saying is Clemson. Closer than the experts think.
They just signed a new kicker off the beach because the current kicker has been a little sheepish in his own way.
Time for our tailgate MVP of the week, brought to you by Sport Clips. Sport Clips is like no other place you've ever gotten your haircut. Sports everywhere, TVs everywhere, playing sports, and guys, smart stylists who know how to give you the haircut you want and the haircut you need. Don't ever need an appointment at Sport Clips. Walk in or welcome, and you'll walk out feeling like an MVP, guaranteed. Be sure to ask about the MVP experience. It's something you just can't put into words. An awesome haircut, hot steam towel, invigorating shampoo, neck and shoulder treatment. It takes a haircut and turns it into an event. Sport Clips, a proud partner of the North Carolina Sports Network. Turn it over to our guys, Mike Waddell and Coach Jimmy Collins, with our MVP of the week, Ethan Albright.
And Ethan, I have to ask you, you've come full circle in your football career. You were a standout player for the Whirlies back in the late 1980s, and now you're back as the Whirlies AD. So before we go back to the Wayback Machine, let's talk about what's going on right now with Grimsley football, because you guys are looking pretty good, undefeated right now, and atop the RPI in the latest NCHSAA rankings.
Well, our football coach, Darryl Brown, just does a fantastic job with the kids. He creates really healthy relationships, and the kids talk about it all over Greensboro. The kids want to play for him. His grandfather was at Southern Guilford. The stadium's named after his grandfather, so he comes from a lifetime of high school coaching, and he does it the right way. There's a lot of people out there. I listen. They're just cussing kids out all over the place. And, 20, 30 years ago, everybody coached that way. You could, because there was nothing else to do. Now I watch coaches do that, and then they wonder why their players transfer out. There's so many options now to go play year-round lacrosse, basketball, baseball. Everybody's got pressure to play year-round. If the kids aren't having fun in high school, we're doing something wrong. Like, there's ways to push, and Coach Brown pushes as hard as anybody. But those kids, like my two sons, got to play for him, and they loved practice. I never loved practice. I did practice. I was active in practice, but I would never say I loved practice. But the kids here, they just really enjoy it. It's a lot of fun.
Keeping it fun is always one of the keys, obviously, at every level of football, and you've been successful at every level. But going back to your time as a Whirly, you were under a lot of pressure to go follow your brother Stuart to play at Duke, where I think Jim Collins might have been trying to recruit you. Of course, we were trying to recruit you at Guilford. We didn't get very strong reception from you to come and play for the Quakers, which was a great disappointment to all of us. But you end up going to North Carolina. Tell me about that recruiting story and how Coach Collins came into your life in that way.
Well, it's one of those things. Obviously, with my dad playing basketball at Duke, I had one brother played baseball at Duke, another brother played football at Duke. When I came along, it was one of those things where I was everybody's younger brother. And I was never embarrassed by my family ever. But I got to a point where I kind of wanted to be Ethan. When my time came for recruiting, I was being recruited as a pass-catching tight end. So obviously, Coach Spurrier and the offense that he ran was very attractive to be a part of it. There was a lot of rumors that he was leaving to go to Florida. So I figured, well, why not take a trip to Florida? And Galen Hall was there, and there were some coaches there that were great. They were very good to me. But all the alumni that were in the area was, hey, Spurrier's coming. Everybody was already talking about Spurrier coming to Florida. So in my mind, I left on signing day, and I told my parents, I'm going to sign with Florida. And I went into high school and sat down with Coach Smouse, my high school coach. He said, Coach, I'm going to Florida. And he said, well, let's just talk about it. He said, what you don't know is your mom called me. she's not going to let you go to Florida. if you want to stay in the Albright house, we need to find a better solution. So I actually sat in his office for 2 hours drawing up pluses and minuses for the schools that I was looking at. And everything came up Florida, except for one category. He said, Ethan, and this made a lot of sense to me. Where are you going to live after you're done playing football? I was like, well, I live in Greensboro. He said, well, Ethan, do you know that? I'm like, oh, yeah. If it weren't for college, I'd never leave Greensboro. I know. I just had that in my heart, in the back of my mind, that when it's all said and done, I was going to be living at home with my brothers, my family, just kind of like we had grown up. He said, well, it makes a lot of sense to go to State University in the network of after you're done playing. And part of that, too, was I wanted to be Ethan. Like I was under the shadow. Hey, I was John's younger brother, Eric's younger brother. Here's Stewart's younger brother, Doug Albright's younger brother, younger son. And I was never embarrassed by any of it. But you get to a point where I think I wanted to show my family that I could stand on my own 2 feet as the youngest and still make things work.
Now, are you the biggest and toughest of all the Albrights? Because if you're not, I can imagine that those Carolina-Duke games are pretty contentious.
It was interesting growing up. It was a physical family. Everything was a physical confrontation until I got big as everybody else. I grew up when I was in high school. I mean, I graduated, I was 210 pounds. I was not a big guy by any means, but apparently I found the freshman 20 every year of college.
Great answer.
Once I could take care of myself, my brothers, they didn't want it to be a physical confrontation all the time.
Ethan Albright with us here on Wild Dogs and Hogs. Mike Waddell along with Coach Jim Collins. And Ethan, you go to North Carolina as that pass-catching tight end for Matt Brown very early in his first tenure as a North Carolina head coach. But then you move to offensive tackle. Who had that conversation with you, and how did they convince you to do that?
Well, it was one of those things you can kind of see the handwriting on the wall sometimes. I got to Carolina, and, I was 210 pounds, and they were struggling in 1 and 10. Other guys got hurt. All of a sudden, I had to play. Well, I as a freshman, physically, I wasn't ready to play at that point, and I took some lumps. I had multiple concussions. I got knocked out. I was the going joke that, hey, he's going out for a pass. He's going to get knocked out. So it just was one of those things where developmental-wise, I broke a finger, so I was in a cast for half a season. It's hard to catch a ball in a cast. However, I did still snap for extra points with a big cast on my hand. I could still snap with it, but it was hard to get downfield and catch. And they recruited a kid named Greg DeLong that played 8 or 9 years in the NFL. Deems May was a tight end that I was competing with. He played 7 or 8 years in the NFL. They had a number of guys that came in that were really good. And so instead of this day and age, I'd have probably been pushed to the portal and told, hey, if you want to play, you got to go to the portal and find somewhere else. But they let me redshirt and presented an opportunity as an offensive lineman. I tried to make the best of it. Size-wise, I probably wasn't what I needed to be, but I was trying hard to put weight on and be a lineman. I wound up being all-conference tackle my senior year. I never set out to be a long snapper, which is where my career took me. I always thought I was going to be a tight end or an offensive lineman. And one of Coach Collins's, one of your colleagues gave me the shot of a lifetime in Miami as an undrafted rookie free agent. Rich McGeorge had a big say in me going down there. And I think very highly, very kindly of him all the time. But I'm just one of those guys. Y'all are very nice to have me on the show, but I'm just one of those guys that feels like I let some people down along the way because I didn't make it as a tight end. I didn't make it as a tackle, but I found my niche as a long snapper.
I mean, other than being the third string quarterback, I always wanted my son to be a long snapper. I sent him to the kicking camps and just basically pushed him in there and said, just go volunteer to snap, get reps in. He's 6'4", 240. He would have been a really good long snapper, but he just didn't have the love for it.
One thing that really helped me was being an offensive lineman. I was able to probably, I would say I'm the NFL record holder for most scout team reps. I was a center guard and tackle during practice for 10 years. I gave center a break, gave the guard a break, gave the tackles a break. And did all the practice reps, but I was no threat to ever take their position as a starting lineman. So they loved it. So when teams would draft long snappers and bring other guys in, the linemen would kind of protect me because they knew I was going to give them a break during practice. And I could have been I was an emergency lineman on game day. I was the 9th lineman. If guys would have got hurt, I could have gone in and got a few plays done until they got taped up and got back in there. But that scenario never happened.
Let me say this, Mike. Ethan played in a time in the NFL where the long snapper, whether it be extra points, whether it be punts, whatever, the long snapper was not protected like he is today. Ethan was under attack every time he put his head between his legs and snapped the football. You need to tell the story now about your back being broken with us in 2002.
Oh, that was one of the things that ultimately caused the end of my career. Was we were playing against the Cowboys. It was the last game of the season, and Leroy Glover had this judo chop. While my head was between my legs, I was looking back. He was lined up right on me, and he judo chopped me and fractured 2 of the little transverse processes that come off my back. And at the time, I had a streak but I did finish the game.
Your time with the Redskins in the NFL, with all of the teams that you played with, truly remarkable. NFL records. You have meme status in the Madden game. We won't go into that. But I want to ask you, because Jimmy and I had a chance to be teammates in the Alliance of American Football with the Orlando Apollos, and I got a chance to be around Steve Spurrier. And growing up a Carolina fan, I didn't like Steve Spurrier. I didn't like him at all. He was the Duke head coach. And when I got the job as the president of the Orlando Apollos, I said, I got to work with Steve Spurrier. Ethan, I got to tell you, Jimmy's heard me say this 100 times. He's the greatest football coach I've ever been around because the guy is a true ball coach. I mean, he's not a CEO. He's not about how he looks or anything else. He just says exactly what's on his mind, and he's the smartest guy I've ever been in the room with.
Well, I think in Washington, when I look back at what's gone on lately, I didn't know all the front office stuff that was going on. Mr. Snyder has made a lot of headlines for doing a lot of different things, but what we saw was Marty Schottenheimer brought me in, and he was a ground and pounded coach. So he put the whole salary cap in the ground and pound linemen and running backs and that kind of thing. And then Mr. Snyder brings in Coach Spurrier. Well, he's going to gun and fun, and we're going to throw it, Coach. By the time that we get the roster turned over probably to what he was hoping for it to be, we're leading the league in dead salary cap money every year. So we're kind of hamstrung on some of the things that I'm sure Coach Spurrier wanted to do that we couldn't with that. And then, when Spurrier leaves, you go to Joe Gibbs, he's going to run the ball. So then I'm in a situation where they're turning the roster over again to go back to a running team. And it was that kind of struggle. It just seemed like Coach Spurrier and the front office couldn't get on the same page fast enough to put the roster where he wanted it to be.
Well, you know what, Ethan? We had the conflict, as you remember, between potential general managers, and I will not name names at this point in time, but we had 2 guys that were trying to make decisions, and they didn't like each other. And then you threw in the owner trying to make a decision, or not trying, making decisions. So guess what? We as coaches didn't make a whole lot of decisions on the roster.
Yeah, I'm glad I wasn't in those front office meetings, because I know we had Marvin Lewis the first year as a defensive coordinator, and he wanted all the money on defense. And I'm sure Coach Spurrier struggled with who they were going to bring in. And then Marvin leaves, and George Edwards was a former Duke player that's been around the NFL for a long time. But at that time, I think it was his first defensive coordinator job.
It was.
So he got a young guy in, and all of a sudden, all the big name defensive guys disappeared. But then we got everybody on offense, and it just seemed like kind of a power struggle all the time between people instead of everybody working together to see that vision. But what Mike did was he reached out to the Buffalo Bills and said, hey, I got a guy worth looking at, because they were looking for a long snapper. And he gave me a very good recommendation. And Bruce DeHaven took a chance on me in Buffalo, coming from Miami, a longtime special teams coach up there. And that worked out great for a while. And then Washington lost a playoff game at Tampa on a bad snap. Then they were looking for a new long snapper. Mike Stock brought me down to Washington, and I was with Mike Stock for a long time. And when he left, Danny Smith came in, and God, Danny could have replaced me at any time that he wanted to with a younger player.
So one of the things about being in the NFL and playing for different teams is, I mean, you amass a lot of stuff, I would think. Miami, Green Bay, Miami again, Buffalo, Washington, San Diego. How much stuff do you amass over the years, or when you leave a team, do you just leave it all behind in your locker?
I got gear. I got swag gear from all those places, and I pass it out to my parents, my brothers. They all like to collect all that. I've got a helmet from each team that I've played for, kind of like your bookshelves behind you. I've got a helmet, and I've got some game footballs that mean a lot to me. They're those little markers from doing something significant within our game plan, and to get, presented a game ball in front of the team. That's a big deal in the NFL to me. Those game balls are special.
They are.
Well, you'll be giving out some game balls as the athletics director at Greensboro Grimsley High School. The Whirlies playing there in Jamison Stadium, the place that every North Carolina high school kid wants to go play in that East-West All-Star game. What are the biggest challenges that you face on a day-to-day basis as the director of athletics at the high school level?
Right, is financially. It's really tough. Grimsley, we've got a huge alumni base, and we've got a big booster club, and they help tremendously. But the cost of officials is up. They all got a raise last year. They 10% across the board. Security costs are up. It's $45 an hour for a police officer. At football games, we have 8 or 9 police officers. At normal games, Coach Collins, that Page game, we're going to have 20 to 24 officers.
Exactly. Yeah.
And transportation costs are up, and ticket prices have stayed the same. So when expenses are up and revenue is the same, obviously it's hard to make things work that way. Most of the sports, I think, is kind of a small college. The soccer loses money, volleyball loses money, field hockey loses money, football pays the bill for everybody. So that's trying to make that work and still get our coaches the equipment that they need and still maintain the tractors to mow the grass and fertilize and that kind of stuff is a bit of a challenge. But again, at Grimsley, I'm very, very lucky because we've got some good corporate sponsors and we've got some people that really care about the school that help us. But it's kind of like the NFL revenue sharing thing. If one team's really way far out in front of everybody else, it's not a competitive balance, and it's not a good game day if all the schools in Guilford County don't have a certain amount where they can all go out and compete and have the tools that they need to do it.
Ethan, we really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule as the Grimsley High School AD and the father of 4 and the husband to your wife, Catherine, to join us here on Wild Dogs and Hogs. And we look forward to seeing you hopefully at a Whirly game or maybe at a Carolina game as the Tar Heels are off to a great start. And I know that makes you happy as an alum.
It does. I'm proud of them. The guys, Mac Brown's put a ton of energy and effort into the program down there. And I love going down there because people remember me in a positive way down there. They treat me special, and it's fun to get down there. But the one son at Northwestern and the ones at Cornell, if I'm going to a game, I'm going to watch them for the next couple of years. And I look forward to getting to Carolina when they're done playing.
All right, Mike, thanks so much. Great interview as always. We're going to talk about our Big 4 games of the week coming up here in just a second. But as we go to the break, here are some of the college football games this week involving teams from North Carolina, presented by King Neptune's Restaurant. The oldest restaurant in New Hanover County has a brand new look, feel, and taste, making it the #1 place for great food in Wrightsville Beach. Owner Jimmy Galeese and his wife Keaton have poured their hearts and soul into the reformation of this North Carolina coastal classic restaurant, and the impact has been fantastic. King Neptune serves fresh fish, chicken, and steak, and has amazing wine and spirits to make your dining experience the best at the beach. Come and taste the creation of Chef Chavez, and you'll know you've tasted a little bit of heaven right there in Wrightsville Beach. That's King Neptune's. Call them at 910-239-3055 and make your reservations now. King Neptune's in Wrightsville Beach, a proud partner of the North Carolina Sports Network. Stay with us. We'll have more of an Old North State Tailgate presented by the North Carolina Port Council coming right up.
Okay, as we come down the stretch on this edition of the Old North State Tailgate Podcast, we say goodbye to Chris Edwards and send him into this weekend. It is time for our XL Moving and Storage Big Four Games of the Week. Number one, we venture just about an hour south of the North Carolina state line for 3-0 Florida State visiting 2-1 Clemson. Remember, the Seminoles are ranked number 4 this week in the polls. The Tigers are not yet back in the national top 25 after falling on Labor Day night to Duke. They have dropped out and not been back yet. This game is a noon kick on ABC at Death Valley. There are undoubtedly the two best, most dominant football programs in the history of the 70-year-old Atlantic Coast Conference going head-to-head this afternoon. And this year's teams at Clemson and FSU were also the preseason favorites, remember, to end up in the ACC title game come early December in Charlotte. Clemson, of course, an original ACC member, has the most all-time ACC football titles with 21. Florida State was a longtime football independent. They didn't even join the ACC until 1992, and yet the Seminoles have the second most ACC football titles with 15. Nobody else in the entire ACC is even close to Clemson and FSU when it comes to ACC titles. Those two tend to be the ones challenging for national championships as well. A decade ago, FSU did it under Jimbo Fisher. Dabo Swinney has pulled it off twice at Clemson in 2016 and 2018. The difference lately in this rivalry, of course, is that the Tigers have won 7 of the last 8 ACC championships, and the Seminoles have not won any since they took 3 straight ACC titles. It was about a decade ago, 2012, 2013, and 2014. All of that under Jimbo Fisher, the coach who a few years later took off for Texas A&M. Looking ahead to today's matchups, these may be still the two most talented teams in the ACC. We used to say that a lot. We haven't had to say it as often in recent years when the Seminoles have been down. It's actually a relatively new twist in this rivalry to say that they're the two most talented, because while the Tigers, for example, have by far the most current NFL players among ACC programs, I just wrote about this at ncsportsnetwork.com if you want to check that out. Florida State used to be way high in that same rankings nationally and ACC-wise, players in the NFL. But that talent pipeline has not quite stopped, yet it has slowed within this last decade at FSU, even as it has completely ramped up under Dabo Swinney at Clemson. FSU right now is actually in the middle of the pack, which sounds strange when it comes to ACC teams with players in the NFL, just the sheer numbers. The most obvious keys to today's game are how proven FSU quarterback Jordan Travis manages the Seminoles offense against what I still think is an absolutely loaded Clemson defense filled with NFL talent and some dudes that hung around for an extra year rather than turning pro when they could have. Meanwhile, it's an unpredictable young quarterback, Cade Klubnik of Clemson, who was clearly nervous and ultimately ineffective in the Tigers' shocking Labor Day night loss at Duke. How does he manage the Tigers offense against what is, again, a very talented FSU defense? If you know how that quarterback story is going to shake out, you're probably going to win at the betting window in Las Vegas. The Seminoles are a 2-point favorite in this game. The Seminoles do lead the all-time series 20-15, but they've lost 7 straight games to the Tigers, reflecting the swinging of that pendulum in Clemson's favor. The Tigers have also won 9 of the last 10 matchups between these two schools held at Death Valley. It is one of the best games in the country. It is one of the best games in the ACC. It is one of the best games in our region. Florida State at Clemson. And remember, everything we said earlier about Alabama. You can't make the college football playoff, historically speaking, if you have 2 losses. Those Tigers already have 1. The Seminoles, undefeated, have a little more margin for error. Again, no 2-loss team in the history of the college football playoff format has been invited. Remember, 11-2 ACC champion Clemson last year got left out because you're kind of allowed 1 free shot, 1 mulligan, if you will. But college football's 4-team bracket is not very, very forgiving if you lose twice. That's at stake for Alabama today against Ole Miss. That's at stake for Clemson today against the Seminoles. Big Four matchup number 2. 3-0 North Carolina visits 1-2 Pittsburgh. That's tonight, 8 o'clock ACC Network. The Tar Heels carry a number 17 national ranking into that game. Thanks to its very impressive wins over South Carolina of the Southeastern Conference and Minnesota of the Big Ten Conference, North Carolina is actually one of only 9 teams nationally with 2 victories already over Power 5 opponents here as we're into week 4 of the regular season. The Tar Heels matchup against these Pitt Panthers actually looks a lot to me like their challenge against the Golden Gophers, except for the fact that it will be Carolina's first true road game this season, and road trips have been a problem for some, not all, but some recent UNC teams. 2 years ago, the Tar Heels lost in overtime at Pitt, I think as part of an 0-6 road record that year during the regular season. Those Heels with Drake May at the controls were actually 6-0 on the road during the regular season 1 year ago. So we'll see which version of Mac Brown's Tar Heels show up at Pittsburgh tonight. After the Heels beat the Gamecocks, mostly with their defense, then they beat App State mainly with their running game, as we've discussed in recent weeks. The biggest difference against the Gophers last week was Carolina's really strong quarterback play from Drake May. He did make some mistakes, 2 more interceptions, but he also threw 2 touchdown passes, and he threw for more than 400 yards, reflecting why the guy was considered a preseason Heisman Trophy candidate. Minnesota's struggles. They actually were tough defensively for most of that game, the Gophers. They actually ran the ball well, the Gophers, against the Tar Heels for much of that game. As the Heels got top caliber quarterback play, the Gophers, with 2 different signal callers, were stuffed by the Tar Heels. Those 2 guys simply could not give the Gophers a balanced offense the way Drake May did for Chip Lindsey's Carolina offense. UNC's defensive coordinator Gene Chizik harassed Spencer Rattler of South Carolina to start the season. Remember those 9 sacks for the Tar Heels, most in 23 years? Then he bottled up the Minnesota offense, despite that strong rushing attack, by essentially making the Gophers one-dimensional. They could run it, and they kept gashing the Tar Heels, but when they needed balance, they couldn't find it. Why does the Minnesota game remind me of this Pitt challenge for the Tar Heels? Well, next up is Pitt quarterback Phil Jurkovec. This guy was a prep All-American. He is a pocket passer. He does have talent, but he left Notre Dame because he couldn't win the starting job there. He left Boston College because while he did start there, he didn't think he could realize his full potential with the Eagles. So this is his 3rd school and essentially his 3rd try to live up to that prep All-American potential, and it has not worked out. He is a pocket passer, not one of these dual threats we've seen elsewhere in the ACC. And whereas you can still see the talent on some throws, he is big, he is strong, he does have an arm. Pitt's offensive line has not protected Phil Jurkovec very well, and when he has gotten that protection, he has not been very accurate throwing the ball down the field. If the Heels can exploit that offense the way they did to Minnesota the last week, the Heels are going to get to 4-0. They are a 7-point favorite at Pitt, and although, again, Carolina was undefeated on the road in the regular season last year in that 9-5 campaign, all 6 of those road wins were by 7 points or fewer. So whether you look at their winless road record 2 years ago or their nail-biter road wins last year, Carolina just has not been the steamroller on the road as it occasionally has been, including against Minnesota last week at Kenan Stadium. Moving on with our big 4 games of the week, XL Moving and Storage. Since opening their doors 25 years ago, XL Moving and Storage has strived to be a moving company that works diligently to meet its customers' needs while relocating them all over the globe. XL Moving and Storage believes it is its responsibility to provide top-notch customer service while offering a broad scope of moving services to all North Carolina areas and beyond. With main offices in Raleigh and Greensboro, the XL Moving and Storage team of dedicated professionals is committed to not only meeting, but exceeding your expectations. Call XL Moving and Storage today and get on the road to an easy, stress-free move.
In Raleigh, call 919-213-6694. And in Greensboro, call XL Moving and Storage at 336-939-6450. You also can connect with XL on the web at www.xlms.com. That's EXCELMS.com. XL Moving and Storage, a proud partner of the North Carolina Sports Network. Moving on with our big four games of the week. 1-2 Georgia Tech visits 3-0 Wake Forest. That's tonight, 6:30, the CW Network. This certainly is not among the sexiest matchups of the weekend. But we selected this game in part just for the opportunity to toss another bouquet in the direction of Wake Forest coach Dave Clawson, one of the best coaches in that school's history. The Demon Deacons were down 17-0 at halftime last week at Old Dominion, and they were down 24-13 entering the fourth quarter. Most teams just do not win under those difficult circumstances, especially on the road and especially with a first-year starter at quarterback. But the Deacons did win, and that is a tribute to those players, their resiliency, and their unbending trust and confidence in their coaching staff, led by Dave Clawson. Sam Hartman's successor at quarterback, Mitch Griffiths, after that brutal start and scoreless first half. Griffiths threw 2 fourth-quarter touchdown passes, the last one to the Deacs' superstar wide receiver Jamal Banks, and Wake did end up surviving ODU 27-24 to remain undefeated. Whether these Deacs can be truly great this season remains to be seen, but they are a 4-point favorite over these middling Yellow Jackets, and they certainly look like a bowl team for the 8th year in a row. That is a tribute to Dave Clawson's amazing record of consistent success in Winston-Salem, where such consistency and 8 straight bowl games, the latter never has been seen before. The entirety of it has been very hard to come by on the gridiron historically at Wake Forest, which among Power 5 teams actually has one of the lowest all-time winning percentages in that entire group of programs. All right, the last of our big four, and quickly, Georgia Tech, while not a dynamic team, is better offensively than it has been. So I don't think this is going to be a pushover for the Demon Deacons. Believe it or not, a lot of people would lose this bar bet. Transfer quarterback Haynes King leads the entire Atlantic Coast Conference in passing yards per game. Anybody who's seen Georgia Tech play offense in recent years knows they have not been very good on that side of the ball. They have been throwing it around the yard. His numbers, King's, even better than Drake Mays, even better than Brennan Armstrong's, even better than the other accomplished quarterbacks in this league. So that improved Deacons defense is going to have to be up to the task as the still growing Deacons offense tries to get that job done. Finally, our big four games of the week. Gardner-Webb visits East Carolina. This is the classic FCS visits FBS matchup. I don't think the Pirates are at a high risk of losing this game, but I will remind you, not many years ago when ECU was having a down season, North Carolina A&T of the FCS ranks played the Pirates head-to-head and beat them. Now, that was back when A&T was competing and sometimes winning HBCU national championships. And we've mentioned on recent shows that every single year there are multiple FCS victories over FBS opponents. Gardner-Webb, remember, won the Big South a year ago. So Trey Lamb's squad is not going to be nervous as it heads to Greenville. We all know the other half of this equation is that the Pirates have been a bad team offensively. It's one thing to just get completely shellacked at Michigan. That would happen to a lot of teams, but they let that fourth quarter lead get away against Marshall, and the offense didn't move the ball much with Mason Garcia at the controls. We were there in Boone last week when the Pirates did score 4 touchdowns, but 2 of those touchdowns were by the Pirates defense. So the continuing struggles of ECU's offense are a massive issue for head coach Mike Houston, who's now in his 5th year with the Pirates. You all know how this works. Pirate Nation gave Mike Houston the benefit of the doubt, as they should have, when he struggled in his first year and struggled in his second year. He's the new guy. His track record at Lenoir-Rhyne and Citadel and James Madison earned him respect and earned him the benefit of the doubt. He won the national title at the FCS level while at JMU and led them to 3 straight national top 10 finishes. Took Lenore Ryan to the Division II national championship game at the beginning of his head coaching career. When you're in year 5, Pirate Nation or any other fan base is not going to have as much patience. And the Pirates are 0-3 as they host Gardner-Webb. I will be intrigued to see, A, how many people show up at Dowdy-Ficklin Stadium to support the Pirates, and B, what is their mood if something goes wrong early, or the offense now under Alex Flynn, the backup, who was better than Mason Garcia, but certainly did not completely upgrade the quarterback play at ECU the way we grew to become a little bit spoiled with Holton Ahlers at the controls in recent years. Remember, Holton is in the NFL on and off the Seahawks practice squad, the best wide receiver at ECU last year. Isaiah Winstead is on the 49ers practice squad. The best tight end, Ryan Jones, is on another NFL practice squad. And the best running back, Keaton Mitchell, is on the Ravens injury list right now. Everyone knew there'd be an adjustment to the loss of that talent. Nobody expected, I don't think, an 0-3 start with the details of that 0-3 start, including just really about as impotent an offensive display as we have seen from any of the teams that we follow closely here in North Carolina. The Old North State Tailgate is an exclusive presentation of the North Carolina Sports Network. Foundational partner, the North Carolina Pork Council. Executive producer, Mike Waddell. Head of content, me, David Glenn. Coordinating producer, Melvin Quitman Jr. Thanks again to our special guests, including the Red Snapper, Ethan Albright. For Chris Edwards and Mike Waddell, I am David Glenn, signing off for this edition of the Old North State Tailgate Podcast, the official tailgating soundtrack of the 2023 football season, right here on the North Carolina Sports Network.